In today's gospel, Jesus uses a phrase, I've mentioned it before, but he uses it in numerous situations and he uses a few variations of it. One is they have ears, but they do not hear. But today he says they have, whoever has ears ought to hear. He says that in a number of times. And so it's differentiating and understanding the context that Christ is speaking in, that there's a difference between listening and hearing. We listen to a lot, we hear very little at the end of the day. And the fact of the matter is that Christ is saying that it's not enough just to listen to what he says. I have to hear it. It means I have to take it into my mind, heart, and soul. I have to understand it and cooperate with it. I have to act on it. That's what hearing is. It's affected me, so now I'm doing something because of that. You know, background noise is something we're used to in our world. Our world is a very noisy place. It despises silence because it knows that in silence it might hear God. So it wants to make as much noise as possible to get people used to listening to the chaos, and that way we no longer even hear God. And it's true, I mean, we all do that on occasion. I remember I used to work in the glass shop. We'd have the radio playing all day long. I couldn't tell you 5 songs that were in a row on that radio, but it was just something for background noise. And every now and then you heard one you liked, you remember, you might sing along, whatever. It's the same. I know many people who, when they're doing things, either around the house or whatever, they'll turn on the radio, sometimes even talk radio. I don't know how you can listen to that anytime at all, but they do. And they just use it for background noise. I'll do the same thing when I'm out working in the garage on occasion. I'll turn on some tunes, some groovy tunes, and be working away. And sometimes I don't even notice what's playing. It's just noise. Other times it'll be a song that I'm really into. I'll stop working and I'll sing a few bars, go back to work. It's like because I heard it. It wasn't just listening. Now it's hearing it, and now it's acting upon it. And so this is what Christ is saying, that if we really say we hear God, we have to act on it. We have to let it sink in. We have to understand what he's saying to us. That's why he says in other places they have ears, but they do not hear. He doesn't say they don't listen, he says they do not hear. So that active hearing. Then you go to the first reading from the book of wisdom. That used to be called simply the Wisdom of Solomon, because that's one of the wisdom books authored by King Solomon. This is early on in the life of Solomon as king, when he's still faithful to God. Solomon heard God speak to him. Keep that in mind. Solomon has heard the voice of God. And the beginning of his kingdom is a very glorious thing for Israel, but for the world in general, because again, this ultimate king of the Old Testament, no king of the Old Testament compares with Solomon, they say, in terms of glory and riches and honor and things like that. Solomon succeeds everybody, even the pagan kings. And to the point where it tells us that people would come from all over to hear him or just to even see the court of Solomon. That it was that glorious and that majestic that they would come from all over the world just to even see it. So Solomon is a king unlike any other. And he heard his father David when his father David told him, explained to him that he has to live according to the covenant of God, so on and so forth. And Solomon acts on that. Again, he hears the voice of God. God gives him this wisdom when he asks for it, and he makes his kingdom grow, and he becomes the most powerful, most magnificent king in the world. And this wisdom of Solomon is taken from those years when he knows God. He tells us, and today's reading in particular is interesting because it talks about the absolute power of God over all things. There is no God besides you. Your might is the source of your justice, your mastery over all things. You show your might when the perfection of your power is disbelieved. You are the master of might. He's emphasizing the power of God, the master of all things, the Almighty. And it's interesting because Solomon knew this. He believed this. He lived according to this for a portion of his life. But what happens? Solomon stops hearing God after a certain point, and he begins to hear other things. And Solomon abandons the covenant he made with God, and he becomes the main source of the idolatry in Israel that goes on to affect them until the coming of Christ. Solomon becomes the main source of that. He stops hearing God, and he starts building these shrines to various gods all over Israel. And this is the same Solomon who had heard God speak to him, who knew of God's might, who knew of God's love, who knew of God's mercy, who had all these things, but at some point he just flipped a switch and stopped hearing God. The temple's still in Jerusalem. He could still go listen to the reading of the law of the Lord if he wanted, but it didn't matter at that point. He stopped hearing. And the entire kingdom is led into danger because of that. And it doesn't survive. It does not survive this moment of Solomon. And the interesting thing is, as much as they talk about the glory of Solomon, do you ever notice in the Old Testament, it never talks about him repenting? So the likelihood is Solomon didn't even get to heaven because of what he did. Never once does it mention Solomon made a single act of repentance to ask for God's forgiveness after he fell into that idolatry. Again, the dangers of Christ says, whoever has ears ought to hear. He's saying we got no excuse. Especially when you look and see how good the Lord is to us. That, again, it's all over the Old Testament. You'll find people taking things out of context. They'll focus on just the wars and things like that, but they miss the main thing is that before any of that happens, God first comes to his people with a very simple thing, love. Before any sort of punishment takes place, God always comes to them first with love and mercy and goodness and beauty. Before anything else happens, God always approaches them in that way first, not relying solely on his might or his power or his awesomeness. God first approaches them with love and says, I desire you to be close to me. This is a way to make that happen. This is a covenant I'm going to make with you. This is how much I want to call you my people. So God always presents them with that one side of the plate first. This is what I want to give to you. I want to be a father to you. I want you to know my love and my goodness. That's the first thing God does all through the Old Testament. It's when they refuse it, he says, since you've chosen not to accept the side of the plate I offered you, he says, this is the other side of the plate. This is what you're going to end up with. That's where the punishment is. That's where the suffering comes from. That's where the evil, that's where the wars come from, because they refused to accept what God offered them. They chose something else. And God says, if it's not going to be me, you're going to get the exact opposite of me. If I am love, you will get hate. If I am peace, you will have war. If I am forgiveness, you will have hate and greed and all these other things. But first he gave them a choice. He approached them with love. Because God doesn't rely on just force to drag us along. He wants us to accept him. He wants us to love him in return. And this is where the good Lord and the devil differ very greatly. Christ talks about it in the gospel. He says God sows good seed in a good field, but the enemy comes and sows weeds. Christ is saying there are those who will willingly and wholeheartedly cooperate with the evil one to the point where they become the children of the devil, even, he says. And they exist. They're out there. There's no denying that fact. Sometimes we are quite weedy ourselves at the end of the day. But he says that they exist. They're out there. He knows they're there. But what did Solomon say back when he was still hearing God? That God gave his children good ground for hope, that he would permit repentance for their sins. That's one of the reasons why the weeds aren't torn up right away, because God gives the chance to repent. Christ is never only concerned with the here and now. He's concerned with that too, but he's concerned more with our eternity. And you notice that's the big difference between how the good Lord approached us and how the devil approached us. Christ comes and says, will you give this up now? Will you do without this now? Will you let go of this now for the sake of what is to come? I don't know about you, but have you ever been tempted and the devil says, think about what's going to happen in the future? Never. The devil never concerns himself with the future. It's always now. He never says, this is going to help you get to heaven later. This is going to help you get through purgatory. This is going to help you avoid going to hell. It's never that. The devil never concerns himself with what's going to happen. It's always now. That's why Christ says, whoever finds his life in this world of things and material illusions, he says, will lose it. He says, whoever's willing to lose their life in this world will find it. Whoever's willing to give up will find true life. But the devil always comes with that temptation of the now. And he'll use things that on their face look just fine to us. Power. Notice St. Paul calls sin, he calls it slavery. Power is a powerful temptation. When we have it, we exchange one set of chains for another one, because the new set of chains we put on is, now that I have the power, how do I keep it? How do I showcase it? How do I make it grow? We get consumed by that power. Money's great. I mean, we all like having it. I've never been angry that I had money. But still, when somebody begins to live for that, they put on a whole new set of chains. It's no longer, I have enough. It's how can I get more? How can I safeguard it? so on and so forth. Fame, popularity. That's a whole nother ball of wax. The devil preys on the temptation to vanity, to pride. And we give that up and we take on a whole new set of chains. And what is the new set? Everything I do, everything I say, how I look, how I act is all directed towards what are other people going to think of me? I want other people to look at me, to see me, to desire to be like me, to follow me, whatever. It's one slavery for another slavery. That's all the devil offers. Christ says he came to bring freedom. And Christ doesn't use force to get us to cooperate. Evil will resort to force when it comes down to it. I told one situation last night. I'll tell you a different one today. So when I was in Chicago, obviously every weird and evil thing under the sun resides in Chicago or New York, it seems like, possibly California. But Chicago is an odd place. Okay, there's a lot of cool things there. There's a lot of very bad things there. And I used to get calls like that on a semi-regular basis out there, people having issues, and a lot of non-Catholics actually calling the Catholic parish because we're the only ones who knew what to do. And it was a multi-ethnic parish. I mean, we had a large group of Americans, Filipinos, Mexicans, and Polish people. So, and each culture has its own little superstitions and idolatries. That's just a fact. Each culture has its own idolatries and paganisms connected to it. And so, this particular time, I got a call from a Mexican family. Okay, that's fine. Whatever. Can you come bless our house? Okay, sure, whatever. Not a big deal. I show up, and I'm like, so what's going on? Why you want your house blessed? Well, there's strange things happening in our home, is what they tell me. Like, well, like what? Well, you see reflections of things in the mirrors. You see shadows moving on the walls. There's lights that will turn on and off by themselves. All sorts of just weird jazz. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's odd, but whatever. And you usually ask Dad, because Dad's usually the first one to rationalize everything away. He's the last one ever to believe. And in this case, the father's like, yes, it's true. It's all happening. I saw it. There was no doubt in his mind, whatever. So it's like, well, how did this happen? How did this happen? So we're talking, trying to get to the bottom of things, right? And again, it shows the difference in the way the devil and God approaches us here. The good Lord doesn't reveal certain things to us because he knows we don't need to know them right now. The devil offers us instant knowledge. But along with that comes a price tag, and that is now he's a part of our lives. So in this case, what happened was a member of the family wanted to find out some information about another family member, and they started doing Santeria, which is a form of witchcraft connected to Catholicism. They mix the two together. It's a very typical South American thing. And they started doing that and invoking these spells and things like that in their home. And that's when all this stuff started happening. Like, well, now you know why you don't do that. Number one. But number two is, again, the devil, once he was invited in, he says, I can give you what you want. But now I'm going to stay here with you too. And that's what happened. Of course, we took care of the issue because the church can do that. But again, Christ came in with his force, his might, his almighty power to drive out the evil one, because Christ himself said what? I came to proclaim freedom to prisoners, to release the chains that bind you. So again, it's up to us always, to remind ourselves that Christ gives us the option. He comes out of love. He comes out of love because he desires us to know goodness. The devil is not concerned with the good. He never has been, he never will be. He's always concerned about us giving control over our lives to him. So what would I rather have growing in my field? Wheat or weeds? Because if I keep inviting the enemy back, he's going to keep sowing weeds. That's just what it boils down to. But if I turn to God wholeheartedly, what does Christ tell his apostles? He says that he knows, he sees the wheat and the weeds, and he will ensure that that wheat is safeguarded. He will not let it be torn up with the weeds. He will not let it be thrown in the fire. He will not let it be put in danger. He says, I see the wheat and the weeds, and I can differentiate between them.